Salamat, George. There's no truth to the rumor that is being spread that he was paid a handsome sum to be able to introduce me that way. But judging from how the introduction was made, I will definitely consider henceforth hiring you. I know you're very expensive, George, being also the chairman of PCCI, in doing these introductions. But indeed, George, maraming salamat. Thank you for the kind introduction. Dean of the Consular Corps, Dean Sergio Ortiz Luis Jr., also a dear friend of mine, and of course, Mr. Jesus Susing Pineda, who was the brains behind my being here today. I was enjoying I think I was jet skiing somewhere in Calatagan when I came back. I had a message, an urgent call, and I thought it was a big emergency, only to find out it was my dear friend who said perhaps it would be good to start the year, so to speak, and perhaps to do my first public appearance by talking about the mining industry here in front of you today, this afternoon. And of course, who can say no to Mr. Susing Pineda? And of course, to the distinguished members of the Consular Corps of the Philippines, members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, really thank you from the bottom of my heart for inviting me here to speak in your monthly meeting for 2022. Actually, this is my first time to appear face-to-face in 2 years. I mean, I've handled a number of even presidential debates, forum. I've been asked to moderate or speak, but it's usually virtual, via Zoom, or whatever kind of platform that you use. So this is, in a way, the first time in a long time, but it feels good. For one, I am now wearing my suit completely. As you can see. No, I'm not wearing shorts. But let me just tell you, and now that it's done anyway, that for the longest time, I would appear on perhaps television, radio, or any of the meetings, and people did not know that I had a very nice suit and tie and a coat on top, but below it was usually shorts and sometimes slippers. And I'm sure all of you did the same. So don't you feel good now that you can gradually come out and be decked out? Don't you think so? So let's give each other a warm round of applause for that. Of course, nothing really compares to really seeing your beautiful faces face to face and, touching the flesh, greeting you. There's nothing like the warmth and camaraderie of being together, not virtually. So it's indeed an honor to have been given this opportunity to bring you up to date on Philippine mining, particularly on the large metallic sector, which is essentially represented in this part of the globe by the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines. As you are all well aware, mining, especially for a country that is as rich in mineral resources as the Philippines, has a tremendous potential to contribute to socio-economic growth. The Philippines has been ranked 5th most mineralized country in the world, with untapped reserves estimated at, listen to this, $1 trillion US. That's not fake news, that's not a misprint, and I'm not being misquoted. $1 trillion US. That is nearly 3 times the country's GDP in 2021. Now, in terms of global prospectivity, Philippine mining ranks 3rd in gold, 4th in copper, 5th in nickel, and 6th in chromite. These figures are perhaps difficult to digest after a very hearty lunch, courtesy of one of my favorite Chinese restaurants, China Blue. But please, with your kind indulgence, just bear with me. We're just getting started. In the 1980s, Philippine mining's contribution to the economy was on the right trajectory vis-a-vis its mineral potential. Our country was the 4th largest producer for gold, copper, and nickel worldwide, with mining accounting for, at its peak, 21% of the country's export earnings. Mining's contribution to GDP reached 2.16% in 1985 And just when things were starting to look up for the industry, sadly, the wheels began to fall off. The global oil crisis, the end of parity rights with the United States, the decline of metal prices, and the Philippines' overwhelming debt burden all drove practically all sectors of the economy, including mining. Of course, the industry simply lost steam and hibernated. The Philippine Mining Act of 1995 should have provided the much-needed boost for the industry. A constitutionality issue filed with the Supreme Court, filed by a good friend of mine, in fact, who is now a justice of the Supreme Court, however, created uncertainties in a bullish business environment. By 2000, mining's contribution to GDP declined drastically to by half to 1%. In 2004, the Supreme Court finally resolved the constitutionality issue. So Philippine mining reopened for business with strong government policy support for the industry's revitalization. The country's high geological prospectivity attracted new investments. It seems mining was all set to live up to its huge potential as a socio-economic growth booster. Then, the policy regime became restrictive. Quite restrictive, if I must emphasize. In 2012, the Aquino administration issued Executive Order 79, which imposed a blanket moratorium on the issuance of new mineral agreements until the enactment of a new fiscal regime. Effectively, the order stopped the industry in its tracks. The policy problems were sadly further exacerbated when the late and then Environment Secretary Regina Lopez, after instructing anti-mining advocates to audit the industry, ordered the closure or suspension of 28 mining operations. While the mining companies appealed such orders and remain operating, the order put the whole industry in a very, very negative and bad light. After a change in the DNR leadership, the Mining Industry Coordinating Council, or the MICC, which is chaired by both the Environment and Finance departments, decided to conduct due audits on the said affected mines. A team composed of academics, technical people, social scientists, in other words, a multidisciplinary group composed of experts in the respective fields conducted the audits. The outcome was that only 3 of those 28 mines had enough serious lapses to warrant their permanent closures. And those 3 mines were actually not operating anyway. Everyone else passed, although some were directed to undertake some remedial measures. Certainly, these new audits gave a very different picture to what was presented to the public after the first order was done under the former DNR Secretary. A total ban was also issued on the use of open pit mining. It's a method for extraction of gold, silver, and complex ores. Now, again, these presented a very, very serious problem. The open pit mining method, as perhaps a lot of you would know, is extensively used all over the mining world, with certain types of deposits can be only mined in such a manner. Also taking into consideration perhaps financial and economical reasons. Adding to the industry's litany of woes was the doubling of the excise tax for mineral products from 2 to 4% of gross revenues. That was in 2018. So again, the news was just getting so tight that the industry could barely breathe. Mining took several big hits in a span of nearly a decade in the form of policy roadblocks, near arbitrary closure and suspension orders, and a new tax rate that made the mining fiscal regime among the highest in the world. It did not help too that these misfortunes were interpreted by the public as a comeuppance for mining. Our image as an industry was, and probably still is, at an all-time low. Consequently, mining's contribution to total exports plummeted to another 8% in 2020. Mining's contribution to GDP, meanwhile, dropped to 0.6% that same year. Now, over the past few years, ladies and gentlemen, mining's share in the country's total exports had been a gradual increase from nearly 6% in 2018 to nearly 8% in the first 3 quarters of 2021. Then again, I must caution you that the growing output of the mineral sector is not the result of a growing industry, but simply because we are currently experiencing higher metal prices, which of course increases our revenues and our contribution to GDP, export, taxes, and so forth. Metal prices, as we do know, they go up and down. They're quite cyclical. So that's why we must take advantage when prices are up. Ironically though, it took a pandemic before the importance of mining was recognized. Only a few large-scale operations experienced temporary closure in the early months of COVID-19, due mainly to local government directives. This explains why mineral exports were largely unaffected and employment in mining was generally stable. Through the recommendation of the Chamber of Mines and the Mines and Geosciences Bureau, or the MGB, it authorized mining companies to now realign their social development funds, equivalent to 1.5% of operating costs, to support COVID-19 affected communities. As a result, mining companies donated over 380 million pesos, or about $8 million on personal protective equipment, disinfectants, medical necessities, as well as food assistance and supplies for social amelioration measures that benefited nearly 300,000 frontliners and over 1 million families in mining host communities. Lady Luck, after a decade of being so aloof, finally smiled on Philippine mining in 2021. In April, we saw the lifting of the moratorium on new mining permits, on new mining projects. And in December, I just don't know why it took that long, but at least in December, the lifting of the open pit mining ban. It was really glad to know that reason and science has prevailed. So these are indeed very welcome developments. We submit that the easing of mining policies was the right thing to do, not only for our industry, but more importantly for our country, still reeling from the ill effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. I must add that it is also very timely, given the worsening impact of the Ukraine crisis on the global economy. Verily, the government needs all the help it can get in these very, very uncertain times. 3 large projects that were stymied by those policy roadblocks that I earlier mentioned are now in a much better position to proceed with its development. Collectively, these copper-gold projects, all in Mindanao, namely Silangan, Tampakan, and King, can increase yearly national government revenues by 12 billion pesos a year. That's 12 billion pesos a year. Local government revenues by 1.5 billion pesos, exports by almost $2 billion, and social expenditures close to 800 billion pesos per year. The Philippines is, by the way, one of the very few mining countries that prescribes for mandated social expenditures as a percentage of our operating costs. In consultation with the communities, you can imagine what yearly expenditures of almost 800 million a year can do to the development of these or those far-flung areas that don't see much of any development. Also, royalties to IPs or indigenous people of a little more than 600 million pesos per year. I don't know if you're aware of that, but we give to IPs 600 million pesos per year. It is no wonder now that the IPs of where these mining companies are operating are clamoring for the immediate start of these projects. Now, I'm only mentioning these three projects that have been hindered by policy problems. The potential is even greater over the years if we can have stable mining policies. Now, lest some or most environmentalists will argue that should that happen, the country's environment will be devastated. That's what they always say. I should point out that the total disturbed area of large-scale metallic mining industry today, if we just put them all together, is only about 2,750 hectares. That represents, ladies and gentlemen, merely 0.01% of the Philippines' total landmass of more than 30 million hectares. These disturbed areas are even within operating mines, which include roads, processing plants, offices and other buildings, port facilities, and the actual mine areas. Now, to give you a better picture, these disturbed areas combined is only slightly larger than the city of Makati, which you can actually barely see in the map. These are scattered within tenements in major mining regions of the country. With such a small footprint, a doubling of mining mines or doubling of operating mines rather, would therefore not mean that there will be mines all over the place, contrary to what they're trying to peddle. Especially given the fact that there are a lot of no-go zones for mining in our country. Certainly, the environment in mining areas will be altered, no doubt. If you put up a building, as Mr. C just recently put up a building, for example, definitely you will alter the environment. But under our laws, these areas have to be restored for other productive uses, also in consultation with the communities. Again, let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that mining is a temporary land use. The land can be restored. I have seen it here in the Philippines, in our several projects that we have in Negros. I've seen it in Canada, I've seen it in China, I've seen it in the United States. There are so much examples here and abroad. On a national scale, the contribution of large-scale metallic mining may appear minuscule. But if you look at the development of local economies and communities that host large-scale operations, you will definitely gain a different perspective. In 2017, mining accounted for nearly 21% of the regional GDP of the Mimaropa region, close to 20% of the Caraga region, and 17% of Western Visayas. When most other industries were separating, terminating employees and workers at the height of the pandemic, government figures indicate that employment in mining increased by 2,000 to 184,000 in 2020, and by 12,000 to 196,000 in the first 3 quarters of 2021. These figures do not reflect the multiplier effect of 4 to 5 jobs created for every employee hired by the industry. As of December 2021, the industry has spent over 26 billion pesos for social development, nearly 385 billion pesos for environmental protection and enhancement, and some 6 billion pesos in final mine rehabilitation. We also take pride in the fact that we have planted 100 trees to replace each tree that we cut to give way to mining. I don't know if the other industries will do that. As a result, we have planted over 45 million seedlings with a survival rate of 90%. Ladies and gentlemen, that is enough trees to cover the entire province of Batangas. You know, I can go on with more figures, but aside from not having enough time, I don't also want to lull you to sleep with this most unholy hour with more numbers. So let me just continue by saying that asking the question, why is it, you might ask, that with all the figures I just gave, mining's reputation is still so bad despite the many good things that has been done and it continues to be doing. What has really affected the reputation of our industry is the fact that there are a lot of illegal mining taking place in the country with no environmental measures whatsoever. Sadly, people do not differentiate between large-scale responsible mining and destructive illegal mining. In their minds, it is still mining. We in the Chamber of Mines, and I'm honored to have been appointed as its chairman, are very much aware of the expectations of society as regards our social, environmental, and governance performance, or ESG. I'm sure you're very familiar with ESG, being with different corporations as well. And of the fact that there is increasing pressure from our stakeholders, and in recent years, even from capital and financial markets, to hold us, miners, accountable. A recent Yahoo article cited a newly released World Bank report, which forecasted that the world would need more than 3 billion tons of minerals and metals to limit the rise in global temperature by 2 degrees by 2050. That's more than 3 billion tons in raw materials for solar, wind, and battery storage. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, on the other hand, reported that last December that future demand for metals and minerals may well top the current global supply. So it is indeed ironic that the mining industry, dubbed in the article, and I quote, a pariah for ages due to its massive environmental impact, is about to turn into one indispensable industry for energy transition, unquote. So against this backdrop, ESG has anchored itself as a mainstream aspect of business and will remain top of mind in the boardroom for years to come. It has become central in terms of both attracting investors and holding a social license to operate. That is why, despite all the numerous laws, rules, and regulations that we must follow, and the fact that most of us in the Chamber of Mines are awardees of ISO certifications, we found that to be not enough. We want to go beyond what is required by the law. And that is why we have agreed to adopt the Towards Sustainable Mining Initiative, or TSM. It's a global standard for best practices in mining. TSM was started in 2004 by the Mining Association of Canada and has proven to be very effective in raising the standards of mining in that country. It is now implemented in 10 countries and was recently adopted by Australia, one of the biggest mining jurisdictions in the world. So we in the Chamber, ladies and gentlemen, are determined to be a strong partner in nation building. One with a strong focus on social development, on minimizing the impact of our operations on the environment, and on ensuring a fair division of economic and financial benefits of mining. But first, please allow us to flourish. Modern mining technology, global mining standards, and the increasingly stringent laws of the land governing mining have evolved in the last 2 decades to assist, enable, and guide the industry to become a responsive and responsible partner. We would like to think that we also evolve in lockstep with these developments. As we anticipate the change of government in the next few months, as you know, elections is just around the corner, we choose to be optimistic. In fact, let me correct that. We choose to be cautiously optimistic. The Philippines has a lot of catching up to do as an investment destination, and we cannot afford to miss the promising windows of opportunity presented by the energy transition in response to climate change. To help the industry realize its full potential and be a true partner as a socio-economic contributor, I have come up with a short wish list, which I intend to present to government, and with your indulgence, let me enumerate them. First, we wish the next government will further its role as facilitator, a partner, and demonstrator of ESG best practices in the mining sector. Second, we wish the next government will continue encouraging increased transparency and reporting of ESG practices in mining. With strong support from our current government, our participation in the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, or EITI, it allowed us to further demonstrate our commitment to the highest standards of transparency and accountability in business. The Philippines was the first out of 51 implementing EITI countries found to have satisfactorily met the 2017 EITI standard for fiscal transparency in the extractive sector. Third, we wish the next government, the next leader, whoever he or she may be, to harmonize local and national laws to avoid conflicts on the ground. The Philippine Mining Act of 1995 is considered by many industry experts to be one of the most advanced mining laws. It holds the distinction of being one, if not the only one, of the mining legislations in the world that has built-in provisions for the protection of the rights of indigenous peoples. Its social and environmental provisions are comparable to measures formulated in industrialized nations. What is needed is to increase the capability of government, both national and local, and the political will to fully implement it. And fourth, please, give mining and all other industries a stable business environment, one where policies are reliable, contracts and investments are protected, and the rules, please, are not changed midstream. So in closing, and thank you for your kindness and indulgence, we do recognize government's difficult role of balancing things, how it can tap the resources and revenues that the mineral sectors can give, while at the same time minimizing or removing economic, social, cultural, and environmental costs tied to it. We pledge our support for government, whoever the next leader will be, as it acts as the bridge linking the business community on one hand, and as we have shown we are definitely capable of doing in involving local communities on the other. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat po, and thank you again for having me here today. Thank you.